It's 2025, the fourth year, day 296 of the full-scale invasion. Welcome. For the daily situation report, in today's report, we see ongoing Russian attacks on Fulia Pole and combat movements in urban areas, military and informational impacts of Ukraine's underwater drone attack on a Russian submarine in Novorossiysk, increasing vulnerability of Russian naval bases, rising economic pressure, and falling oil prices, which won't help the Russians next year. And, as always, much more. Let's start right away with Fulia Pole, because the city continues to be attacked. On the topographic map, we see the Russians control the high fields. The city, like many others, is in a valley, but the elevation difference is just about 50 meters. Unlike other front sections, it's usually 80 to 100 meters. The directions of attack are clearly marked, and you can of course see another flanking maneuver in the southern area. The Russians are trying once again to enter the city from a different side, because it didn't work so well from the north. Up here you can consider this area as Russian controlled, just like the area down here, inside this part. There is little geolocation in the city. As I mentioned, most Russian geolocations are here or up here, but almost none in the city itself, which is of course a bit surprising. You can easily imagine that the Russians are trying to find or create a breakthrough somewhere around here, so that Ukrainian troops, especially in this heavily fortified eastern area, become encircled. But Ukraine is actually well positioned. They have several territorial defense units here, as well as the 225th Attack Regiment, which has already proven itself. In the meantime, there is also a geolocation up here at the blue pin, which is here. A Russian unit from the 102nd was there. The brigade was attacked there with drones. That's basically the brigade that's here, a territorial defense brigade. And right in the middle of the city, the Russians once again carried out a completely ordinary strike against residential buildings with thermobaric munitions from a TOS-2 rocket launcher. How do you know it was a TOS-2 and not a TOS-1 launcher, which should actually be seen more often? It's simple. The Russians recorded and published it themselves. You can see it on my Telegram channel. A tank was attacked at the green pin, not that far from the blue one. Unfortunately, the video was posted without context, so at first glance I can't say whether it was a Russian or a Ukrainian tank. But as I said, the situation in the city is not as bad or as confusing as in Pokrovsk, but it's also not as easy to observe as in Siversk. It's somewhere in between. That means I ask you to wait a few more hours for new information until the situation becomes a bit clearer. Yesterday, we saw a video of Ukrainians hitting a costly Russian submarine in Novorossiysk port with an underwater drone. Anyone there yesterday knows I was the first German-speaking military vlogger to report it. Of course, this was only possible because so many people have subscribed to the channel and are also channel members who keep motivating me to continue every day. Thank you again at this point. Our favorite propagandist also commented on this incident. Solovyov called on Russian Z bloggers not to spread videos and reports about the attack on a Russian submarine. He emphasized not to further spread Ukrainian depictions and footage and to refrain from making their own assessments of the results until an official statement from the responsible Russian authorities is available. That will probably never happen since it will never be released. Or it will be claimed again that things were completely different. Or the submarine crew may have simply made a mistake and accidentally blew it up. Those are the three possibilities, because either it never happened or it happened, but there was no damage, just like with many refineries. Wink, or the soldiers, are blamed for smoking. That's typically Russia's report when Ukrainians succeed. Solovyov's intervention suggests that the Russian leadership is trying to control the flow of information and to prevent uncoordinated reporting even from within its own propaganda circles. What's striking here, and this is the interesting part, is that it's precisely those actors who usually spread Russian success stories early and without any filter who are now preaching restraint. For example, the complete capture of Kupiansk. Of course, there's also a Russian video that they uploaded today, which comes with a sort of statement. Here they claim that the submarine was indeed hit, but absolutely undamaged. You can see a boat here that is still afloat in the port of Novorossiysk, but the stern, the likely impact point, the damaged area, is conspicuously left out for some reason. So they're filming the whole time exactly from the side that's directly opposite the impact and possibly another hit. I'm not claiming that I didn't break my leg and then send a picture of my arm as proof. Besides, it's also not clear whether the submarine in this video is the one that was hit or the one that was nearly hit. So far, if you look at the video footage, it actually looks more like the drone hit the pier just next to the submarine. An underwater explosion can also seriously damage a submarine, especially at close range. Most World War II submarines, especially German ones, weren't sunk by direct hits. They were sunk by depth charges that exploded near the submarine and caused major damage inside the sub. They became unusable and sank. It could also just be an old recording edited in here. Either show evidence from the side that was hit too, or drop it. How much impact does that really have? Well, the effects of this attack clearly go far beyond just the material damage. The ships and submarines in Novorossiysk are only there because they were moved from Sevastopol after the Russian Black Sea Fleet headquarters was repeatedly hit by Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Do you still remember these images? Novorossiysk was once seen as a safer backup port outside the immediate area. However, this attack proves the assumption is now invalid. With the recent strikes on Russian Black Sea ports, it has become clear that Ukraine is now capable of reaching all relevant bases of the Black Sea Fleet. Whether in Crimea or on Russian mainland, this means there are effectively no safe harbors left in the Black Sea. If these patterns continue, the list of damaged or disabled units of the so-called Black Sea Fleet is likely to grow even longer. This forces Russia to either redeploy further, reduce operations, or invest more in protective measures, which still remain ineffective. What's especially explosive is the fact itself, which I mentioned yesterday. The attack was reportedly recorded by surveillance cameras at the port of Novorossiysk, which Ukrainian actors accessed. It stands to reason that Ukraine can overcome physical barriers to Russian military ports and has also deeply penetrated their digital surveillance and security. Access to such cameras enables long-term movement profiles, precise target selection, optimal timing of attacks, and of course the identification of valuable targets. This greatly increases naval units' vulnerability, as even well-protected ports no longer serve as safe havens. Considering the recent remote attack on the large Russian airfield with strategic bombers, that was also done remotely. The drones were basically controlled via the Russian telephone network or the Russian radio network, which the Ukrainians suddenly also had access to. The infrastructure is very dilapidated and seemingly unprotected. Russia is losing both platforms and confidence in its rear security. This opens up a major course of action for Ukraine, which they will likely continue to use in the future. Bloomberg reports Russian oil prices have dropped to about $40 per barrel, the lowest since the full-scale invasion began. For comparison, Russia's state budget was based on oil prices of $70, $80 per barrel, and that's for the war. This discrepancy forces Russia to fund its ongoing, especially war, expenses with less revenue than planned. Pensions are being cut and taxes raised because oil revenues no longer cover the war costs. This also increases budget pressure, requiring higher production, more debt, or cuts elsewhere for compensation. Zelensky stated that Ukraine expects to receive 210 billion euros from frozen Russian assets in Europe. In 2026, Kiev expects initial tranches totaling 45 billion euros. Overall, the funds are mainly intended to be used for the reconstruction of the country. Volodymyr Zelensky stressed that daily war damages will far surpass 200 billion euros. He also noted that some of the funds are urgently needed now, in particular for expanding weapons production, procuring air defense systems, and other security-related measures. That's true. Do you recall the severe ammunition shortage the Ukrainian army faced during the Battle of Bakhmut? They were waiting in vain for a $60 billion aid package from the United States, which was partly blocked by Trump. When it finally arrived, the situation for the Ukrainians only improved temporarily, because $60 billion isn't a lot of money in the context of a war. I often hear, hey, the wars, millions of us, why isn't that enough for them? It's simple. An anti-aircraft missile costs 1.2 million euros, and Russians attack with 400, 600 flying objects at night. War is also very costly for Russia. You must understand it's expensive. Soldiers must be equipped, trained, fed, and above all, paid. All of that costs money, and that's a big part of it. Ammunition costs money, weapons cost money, uniforms cost money. 60 billion is the scale of a war, a drop in the ocean, especially when you have to make up for a deficit. So yes, 210 billion sounds good at first, but if it's in quotes only 40 to 45 billion a year, there are many areas, for example, reconstruction, the army, the development of new systems, and also new acquisitions, which you have to pay for, won't get what they actually need to be able to perform well here. But the big advantage this time is that they are using Russian money and dealing with that, not European money, which takes some of the wind out of the sails of opponents of support measures. As always, thank you for listening. Special thanks to subscribers, Allgäu Crew channel members, and especially Lieutenant Colonel Rennecke, Robert Ziller, and Dietrich. Subscribe, like, comment, and see you in the next situation report.